Hello, we're sitting in Caroline's office in the House of Commons, and this is a first for us. We haven't done a live broadcast like this before, so bear with us. We'll do our best to answer your questions. We thought it'd be helpful just to set out a little bit about what our understanding of a progressive alliance is. There's been a lot of discussion about it. For us, we feel there needs to be a big conversation in the party about it, and this is part of that. We want to hear what people think. But it is very much for us about bringing about the change that we really feel is needed in this country, and particularly electoral reform. It is about reforming the electoral system. At the last election, the Green Party got more votes than all the other elections put together, and that should have given us 24, maybe 25 MPs in the House of Commons. But under the first past the post system, it's just Caroline. Imagine 25 Caroline Lucases. Wouldn't it be great? But we have to face reality as well, that we are looking at, particularly the boundary changes going through, decades potentially of Conservative Party rule unless something changes significantly. It's looking not like we're going to get a change in government anytime soon. We're seeing very alarming moves in the continent, in states, and things are looking very, very bleak. But there is a way of breaking open the system, a system that is failing, a system that is struggling under, in what was it, in the 1950s, 95% of people voted for the two big parties. Now it's about 2/3, and people want more choices in elections. They want real representation. And we've got to break open this two-party system. We know that when you change the system, you change people's lives. So the suggestion is that we work together for maybe one general election only, to get rid of that Conservative majority, work together with other parties that would share our values and principles, particularly around electoral reform, must be around electoral reform, to win those seats that are marginal from the Conservatives, form or to have some kind of progressive government that would bring in electoral reform, not necessarily, probably not a coalition, but a minority government that would be supported by other parties who support electoral reform. Caroline, I've talked too much.
Well, just to add a couple more things about process, just to reassure people that there will be an opportunity to discuss this at conference. So if you go to the members' website, on the pre-agenda forum, there is now a draft motion that's taken a little bit of time to get up there, because we've been getting the wording agreed with both GPEX and GPRC. But that does mean that there will be an opportunity at conference to discuss this. We're also travelling around the country, and we've both been to several of the regional party meetings that are happening. I was just in the East Midlands on Saturday, and I know Jonathan's travelling around as well. So we're trying to have a big debate in the party about the issue. This web forum is another tool that we're using to try to reach people to discuss it. And I guess the only other thing I would add to sort of Jonathan's background about why this issue now and why we think it's got some potential. I just think that until now, the Labour Party has never been in favour as a party of electoral reform, and they're still not quite there yet, but they are moving in that direction. And I think that's the game changer, that when electoral reform becomes in the Labour Party's own interests, then that, I think, is what can really push this issue much, much higher up the agenda. And it's interesting that John McDonnell, for example, has done a very public U-turn now, saying he supports electoral reform. Jeremy has said that as long as there's some kind of link to a constituency, then he wouldn't be against it. We've had a new all-party group being set up in Parliament just last month by Chuka Umunna and Jonathan Reynolds. So, you know, this support isn't coming from just one section of the Labour Party, it's right across it. I spoke at a fringe meeting at the Labour Party's autumn conference, absolutely packed on electoral reform. So that is the game changer. The proposal is around probably a handful of constituencies where we might be able to make some agreements to see whether or not we can get more candidates put forward, and therefore more MPs elected who will absolutely push for electoral reform. So I think if we look down this right-hand side, we can see some questions. So should we go straight to those?
Yeah.
Do you want to do that
Shall I ask you one? I'll ask you the first one.
Okay.
This is from Mark Birkwood. How important is it for local parties to have local autonomy when making decisions about progressive alliances?
Well, it is absolutely essential. It has to be a local party decision. This cannot possibly be something that is foisted from above, and it would be wrong and it would be counterproductive if that were the case. But I guess what we're hoping for is that that there'll be a real discussion, not just in the relevant local parties, but in the local communities as well. And we're working with the think tank Compass. People who've been to party conferences might remember meeting Neil Lawson from Compass. And they are putting some resources into being able to act as a kind of convening organisation, if you like. So it might be that in a handful of constituencies, Compass will host public meetings where we can really get, or you can really get a sense of what the local community is thinking, as well as what people from other local parties are thinking. I mean, the local Labour Party, local Lib Dems and so forth, because this will only work if it's open, if it's transparent, and my experience so far has actually been that these meetings have been really helpful. So, for example, there was a meeting in Brighton. It was actually hosted by Sussex Progressives, which is another group a little bit like Compass, who are acting as the conveners, bringing the parties together, having the debate. And people came from no parties, all parties. You know, it was a really, really good debate about how do we, on the progressive side of politics, stop always having the situation where we fight each other and the Conservatives come straight through the middle and win. Because while we debate and discuss about progressive alliances, be under no illusion that there is a regressive alliance happening between the Conservatives and UKIP. And we just have to be a bit smarter, I think, in terms of how we deal with this electoral system. But the bottom line, to answer Mark really, really clearly, is that it absolutely has to be finally a local party decision. And indeed, some constituencies cover more than one local party, so it has to be a decision of both local parties for sure.
I think the only thing I'd add is that it has to be local parties that are leading on this, otherwise it won't work. It has to happen at the local level, and it can happen in a number of ways. For example, with open primaries, people engaging with their communities and selecting a candidate jointly. It will come out of discussions with local parties and between local parties. So this must really, really be led from the bottom up for it to have any chance of working. And also, it's important that local parties, and it isn't just a matter of selecting a candidate and then doing nothing else. It is an active campaign that needs to be waged in every constituency. Even if there's a joint candidate, parties would perhaps be going out and explaining on the doorstep why there's a joint candidate, why people are doing this. There's a real active process that needs to be gone through. And if local parties aren't doing that, aren't actually owning the process, then it can't happen. So, it is absolutely crucial that local parties have that autonomy and drive it forward.
I'm really struggling to make this.
I see
that one. That's why. Okay, so I was going to put the next question from. That's going to test my pronunciation. How do you pronounce it?
Is it Lolo? Is it? I can't tell if it's an L or an I. Lolo Jones.
It might be Lolo Jones or Iola Jones.
Iola Jones.
Whoever it is, I'm really sorry because I'm sure we've just messed up your name. But the question is, would the Green Party be willing to work with UKIP to achieve proportional representation?
No. My personal opposition to UKIP is well known. I think the Green Party are very, very clear in, our values are entirely different. And it is about progressive parties, and UKIP are not progressive in any shape or form. It's true that UKIP want to see proportional representation, but in terms of who we could work with electorally in an election, I think UKIP would be absolutely out of the question. I don't think that's really up for discussion. Certainly in all the parties that I've talked to, gone around the country, no one is in any shape or form thinking about working with UKIP.
I mean, having said that, which I do agree with, when we're talking about progressive alliances, there are organisations like Make Votes Matter that you might have come across. They're a little bit like Electoral Reform Society, only they tend to be a bit more dynamic on social media. They are really, really going out there campaigning just specifically on electoral reform. And, for example, if they are holding meetings on electoral reform specifically, not about progressive alliances in general, but specifically about getting electoral reform, and UKIP happens to be on the panel, I mean, I think that's up to local parties to decide if they want to take part in that. I'm not suggesting that people should necessarily boycott that. I mean, I think, UKIP, however much we really dislike their policies, I mean, 4 million people voted UKIP and they've got 1 MP, so you can see the way in which there is an injustice there, technically, even though we wouldn't want to work with them. Do you want to do the honours with the scrolling thing?
I'll see if I can do this. I don't know how you. It's not working.
The country's safe in our hands. We probably
how did you do that?
Work the.
You kind of drag it.
Let's go down. We need technical support.
We need another question. A question submitted online from a member. There we go. How do we bring it about? How do we bring out the best and not the worst in Labour and Lib Dems in an alliance? We can trust Plaid and the SNP, but I'm not so sure about those two. This is all. That's all the question. That's all my personal view.
Okay, so I think that I mean the dynamics between the different local parties, the different political parties will be different in different areas. I was up in, as I said, in Derby on Saturday, and it was clear there that the majority of local parties there were able to work much better with the Lib Dems than they were with Labour, and I know that situation will be reversed in other areas. So I don't think there's a blueprint. I mean, I think it'll be about the kinds of relationships you already have and how to build up trust with those other parties. A number of local parties at the Derbyshire meeting were saying that campaigning together over the referendum had been a really practical way of building trust between them, so that was really helpful. Another way to do it would be, again, for there to be a third party organisation, whether that's Compass or a progressives organisation or just an NGO, who could be the kind of convener of a meeting. So it's not the Green Party going, apparently cap in hand to some other party saying, will you talk to us about this issue? It's actually something that can be demonstrated to be a much more grassroots desire and an impetus, and I think that's helpful when that can happen. In terms of how you really hold them to account, I mean, one way of doing it, and it was interesting that there were discussions in Wales around the Welsh Assembly elections, and for various reasons it didn't finally happen, but they got as far as having a draft memorandum of understanding between the different political parties. And I think if you get a document like that signed by the chairs of the local parties, then even if you don't make that public, you've got that in your back pocket, and I think that can be quite helpful in terms of being able to make sure that you can hold people to account.
And that, of course, happened in New Zealand as well, where they had the memorandum of understanding, and that worked. I think there's also a place maybe for the Green Party to be showing leadership, though. There is an element of someone has to make the first move, someone has to initiate, and I think the Green Party have really shown leadership in doing this. And there is an inevitable, sense in which you are making yourself a little bit vulnerable. But yes, we've got to go in with our eyes open. We have to get those assurances. We have to get those agreements, and it must be based on that trust. But again, going around and talking to all the different parties around the country that we've discussed this with, the local parties, there is a real genuine desire to talk, and there is active engagement going on between local parties, and it is very much based on those relationships. People were brought together, as Caroline said, in the referendum for the first time. They found themselves campaigning on an issue alongside other parties, and they realised that those other people weren't so bad after all, and that where there is common ground, where there's common interest, there can be trust, there can be a shared campaign, and I think that is really, really encouraging. That's why I think another reason why this moment is so important, on the back of the referendum, on the back of that shared experience, is something now to be built on.
Okay, so there is now a question from Alan Borges. Hello, Alan. How would you reach out to rural voters in the countryside who care about green issues but are not swayed by left-wing arguments?
I think it's really important that we remember that it's not just most people don't vote because they are naturally left-wing or right-wing. They see it very much in terms of the issues in their local community. And when we look back historically at where there have been real huge changes in Wyre Forest, for example, or with Martin Bell in Tatton in '97, they were very much based around specific issues. People weren't seeing it so much as a left-right thing, but they cared about saving their local hospital. They cared about cleaning up politics and cash for questions. And this is the big challenge, I think, for us. We've seen it in the Scottish referendum, where it was a political referendum on a political settlement, but people recognised that it was really impacting their lives. In the European referendum, it was about political arrangements, but people saw the impact on their lives. And the challenge for us around electoral reform is to show how changing the electoral system really will change people's lives. And I think in any constituency, whether it's rural, like you're talking about, Alan, or in a city area, if we can make that connection with changing people's lives, it's about protecting the NHS, it's about protecting our welfare state, it's about good public transport. If people can see that and we can make those connections, then that's when it's going to work. When the penny dropped for me was after I had that confrontation with David Cameron in 2010. And it suddenly hit me that, there are 10 million disabled people in this country, but we'll never have a proper debate about disability as we did in 2010, because I confronted David David Cameron, because of the electoral system, because that is not where the parties are targeting their messages. So we'll get the empty debate about tax and spend, about inheritance tax. We won't debate Trident, we perhaps won't debate climate change, we certainly won't debate disability, because it's focused on those marginal seats with those few 100,000 marginal voters and their interests. Those are the people that the parties have to convince and sway in order to form a government. But if we change the system, we change people's lives. Suddenly those 10 million disabled people, their votes really, really do count. And suddenly everyone who cares about climate change, everyone who cares about Trident, that changes the agenda. So it's about making those links for people in those rural areas, and then I think, it will be successful.
Do you want to move on?
Let's do it. So from Michael Tweddle, how will the Progressive Alliance play a role in the Stoke by-election? Caroline.
Well, as we've said in answer to an earlier question, clearly it is for the local party to make the decision on that one. I think in Stoke, it's quite interesting because, of course, there you've got Paul Nuttall from UKIP, who has been selected to fight it. And, the dynamics there will be whether or not Stoke will be a place where UKIP can win its first seat as UKIP, rather than having Douglas Carswell, who defected. So that will certainly be a factor, I'm sure, in people's minds as they think about it. I don't know who the other candidates are yet. I'm not sure if they've been selected yet. Other considerations, I guess, the local party will be thinking about is whether or not there's a candidate there who would support electoral reform, because if there isn't, then as we're saying, that is kind of the bottom line, the red line for a Progressive Alliance, as far as we would imagine, at least. But I think it will be a by-election that's really under the spotlight of the media. So it will be really important that if we do stand, that we have a really strong candidate and a really strong campaign. But as I say, these different local elections, these different by-elections will depend largely on entirely on what the local party decides. But hopefully, what we and others can do is feed in some of the issues they might want to consider as they weigh up those decisions. Obviously, personally, I don't think it's all that helpful if we get tarred with the brush of having let UKIP in. Having said that, I think there's also a way of challenging that, because nobody owns votes, and in a sense, if another party doesn't get their vote out, then that's kind of their fault, not ours.
Fine, to add to that. Do you want to ask me the next
Okay,
one?
so we've got Claire. Although she does say she's not a priority, she gets to ask her questions.
You're not going to do Julie Bennett first?
Okay, I'll do Julie Bennett first. Sorry, Claire, but you did say you're not a priority. So she says, many alliance skeptics feel that Progressive Alliances remove the choice to vote for a chosen party by placing these decisions in the hands of party officers instead of voters. How do you respond to those who argue that Progressive Alliances are fundamentally undemocratic?
That's a good question. First of all, I'd start from saying that the existing system is fundamentally undemocratic. So even when you do have a Green candidate standing, it's important to send that strong signal to Westminster, and we encourage everyone to vote Green. But we know the reality is that many people hold their noses and vote for the least worst option. And that does no one any favours. It doesn't give people the choice, the real choice that they need in elections. It doesn't present the real range of alternatives. But I think there are ways of having, as we've talked already, about having open primaries and actually engaging more people in the process and making it a very open, transparent and democratic process. So you engage the community and you say, well, let's choose a progressive candidate together. Let's all select. So it actually is taken out of the few hundred people in a local party who are selecting the candidate, and we know that in safe seats, a few hundred people might choose a Labour or a Conservative candidate, and they're actually the ones that are determining the outcome of the election. Because, you can pin a red rosette on a donkey, as the saying goes in some places up north, and they'd still get elected. It's about which candidate is chosen by those few hundred people. You can spread it out so thousands in the constituency are actually choosing that candidate, and then it's far more democratic. So it's a real opportunity to engage far more people in a process which otherwise people wouldn't feel that they had a say in.
I think that covers that. I mean, I think it really is important that this is not something that is either done or perceived to be done kind of behind closed doors. We need that discussion and debate, and it is, as Jonathan says, really up to the local community to decide if they want to kind of forego the choice at that one election in order hopefully to then get a different kind of electoral system under which their voices will be heard all the time. Because all too often under this system, you might think you've got choice at an election, but as Jonathan said, in reality, there's very little.
Okay, this is from Claire, and she's been lovely in saying, Claire Phipps, not a priority question, as I get to ask questions at GPEX, but should we do it quickly? Jonathan used the phrase joint candidates. Wasn't aware we had provision in Constitution for joint candidates. I'm sure Women's Equality Party would be pleased if we did.
Did you use the phrase joint candidates? I didn't catch that, sorry.
I mean, shall I answer that? I mean,
Yeah,
what I was saying was essentially it's up to local parties to decide how they want to do this. And we put out a paper which explores these options, and Judy Mack on GPEX, the elections coordinator, has made this available to local parties to address precisely these issues. And the point is that there is a range of different options, a range of different ways that this can be done at a local level. We'd encourage local parties to explore what there is and what there isn't. These are unpacked in the Constitution according to what is possible and what isn't possible according to the Constitution.
Yeah, Judy Mack's paper has gone to all local party contacts now, and she also, indicates where people can get more information, either directly from the Electoral Commission website or indeed from herself and others in the electoral elections team. So yeah, there are a range of possibilities there. Okay, so now, sorry, the reason I'm lurching towards the screen is because my eyes aren't as good as
I need to ask
Jonathan's.
you this one because I answered that one. Yeah,
okay,
yeah, it's your turn.
Yeah, okay.
From Rebecca Dobson, do we have any data or evidence of the impact a progressive alliance could have on a general election outcome? As an incentive to other parties, Labour in particular, can we quantify what the Green offer in this alliance would be, i.e. how many more seats could we reasonably assist another party to achieve?
Well, a really good question, and the data gathering is going on at the moment, and it's made more complicated by the fact that, of course, we've got the threat really of the constituency boundary changes, and so the data looks different under different boundary change options. So I also think that there's also the issue, of course, that people might vote differently if there were a progressive alliance proposal. So it's not just as simple as looking at what the electoral data was last time around and then trying to extrapolate that into where we would be now. Having said all that, there is some number crunching going on. There are people in other parties too who are identifying what would be the key seats where a Green vote might make a difference, or where a Labour or a Lib Dem vote might make a difference. Certainly somewhere where we would very much clearly benefit would be somewhere like the Isle of Wight, where we are ahead of both Labour and the Liberal Democrats in the Isle of Wight. And so that would be a very obvious place where we would be wanting to say, well, look, if there is any kind of agreement to be done, then that would be an area where we could, really make a difference. And because basically it's a Conservative and then it's UKIP. And if Labour and Lib Dems were to support us there in the Isle of Wight, I think we could win that. And we've got a great candidate in Vix Lothian as well. So the answer essentially is that the data is being crunched as we speak.
Do you want to ask the next one? Can you read that?
Yes. So the next one is from R. Brandt. How do you see the issue of progressive alliance interacting with Brexit and the attempts to forge alliances around that issue?
I think it's really important to be focused on what we're after, and that's electoral reform. And that's the game changer. But clearly, the next 2 years, at least, are going to be dominated by discussions on Brexit, and so we have to take that into account. Clearly, it was a big factor in Richmond, and it is a big factor in how things will play out on the ground. Now, it depends, I guess, when the general election might be. If we had a snap election this year or before 2020, clearly that would be a big factor in it. If it's going to come in 2020, it may be that things have been decided a little more clearer, and that's less of an issue. But we should be open to those political realities, and we should take them seriously. Clearly, people are thinking, and elections appear to be dividing much more along those kinds of lines than they are maybe around left and right. And it's that we have to be open to these changing landscapes and political landscapes. And what is absolutely clear is things are changing so rapidly. If we'd been sitting here 2 years ago trying to predict what things would be like now, none of us would have got it right. And I doubt anyone is going to be able to predict accurately what things are going to be like in 2 years' time. And so it's really important to keep those options open. And certainly at the local level, when local parties are making these decisions, this is going to be something they want to factor in. Do you want to? You're particularly passionate about this issue. Do you want to add anything, Caroline?
I think you covered it all right. I'm happy with that.
Georgia. Hi, Georgia. Hi, both. Given that the Lib Dems have said sorry, it moved up. They won't go into a coalition with Labour, but would with the Tories. Why should we potentially help them elect MPs at the general election? And I'm glad you're taking that question, Georgia.
Well, I mean, if Tim Farron sticks to that line, then I think that would reduce the chances of an effective progressive alliance or progressive alliances plural really taking place. But I think that the trouble is that both Tim and Jeremy are kind of playing to their own gallery at this point, and are saying things publicly which are different from what they might say privately, and that's nothing new in politics, but it is intensely frustrating. I know when Tim refused to rule out potentially going into a coalition with the Tories, I mean, there was a huge backlash from his own party and indeed from other senior Lib Dem people as well, MPs and people in the House of Lords too. So conversations are ongoing, and we are very hopeful that that is not a line he's going to pursue, because it's really clear that the last coalition with the Tories didn't really go that well, and I don't think anyone's in any doubt about that. So I'm hoping that we can change some of that narrative. I mean, we might not be able to, in which case, maybe this idea doesn't go so far, but there's all to play for right now, I think, because there are many people in the Lib Dems who absolutely support this agenda. They want to see it moving forward, and their voices will be pretty powerful in this debate as well, I think. Okay. Andy Parkin, what's the scope for converting Labour MPs who don't currently support PR?
Well, huge. I think with every week that passes, a month that passes, we're seeing more and more Labour MPs who were pretty wedded to first past the post, changing their minds. And I think that's really, really encouraging. And I think, as Caroline said at the beginning, that's one of the big factors that makes this very, very exciting, that more and more Labour MPs are getting on board with proportional representation and more open to these questions, discussions and progressive alliances. So, the momentum, excuse the pun, is in the right direction.
I mean, I think they see the electoral writing on the wall with what's happened in Scotland. They got 24% of the vote just about in Scotland, I think, and just one MP. So they recognise that a change in the voting system would be good for them. When you add to that the constituency boundary changes, then I think there are very, very few people in Labour who would honestly, hand on heart, say that they really think they've got a chance of winning an outright majority at the next election. And I think that realisation is dawning for more and more of them. So I think there is huge potential here. And I spoke at, as I said, a fringe at the, it was actually Momentum. It was the thing called The World Transformed, I think. It was in parallel with the Labour Party conference. And you had John Landsman, the chair of Momentum, was debating with me, and he disagreed about this, but easily 99.9% of Momentum members who happened to be in the room, and there were several hundred of them, were absolutely on board with it, absolutely agreeing. And I think that many of the people who joined Labour in recent years are in fact much less tribal than perhaps people would have been a few years back. I think politics is changing, and this is a real opportunity. So
one from our GPRC friend, who's literally our GPRC friend. We have someone on GPRC, the Green Party Regional Council, who is our kind of link person. It's Oliver Dowding. We can engage with those who vote, many totally tribal, or with non-voters and unregistered. 8.5% of electorate voted in a Tory councillor in Bath recently, 25% turnout. How to pull in the 75% disengaged?
Well, I think in a way, Oliver, you kind of answered your own question in the sense that everything we've been saying is about how we make people's votes count, and in many of those constituencies where people aren't voting is because they just don't think their vote makes a difference. Why would they bother? And so the offer of being able to say that this is a strategy whereby you can then get a voting system where your vote will always make a difference, I think is an attractive one. And it's one of the ironies that the phrase about taking back control was used very loudly by the Leave campaign, and let's take them at their word. One of the things we want to take back control of is taking back control of our democracy, because right now it is scandalous that we have a government that was elected on just 24% of the eligible vote. So the more that we can explain to people that what might sound like a very dry, abstract constitutional issue is actually about their own role in a moving democracy, then I think we can get some traction with them. And I think we need to learn something from the Scottish referendum, because whichever side of the debate you were on in Scotland, it's clear that what they succeeded in doing was to make a kind of a dry constitutional issue into something that really captured people's imaginations. So I'm not suggesting we stand on people's doorsteps talking about STV versus AMS versus AV Plus or anything else, because that is guaranteed to turn people off. But if we can really talk about the language of, we want your voice to be heard, we want you to be able to make a difference. You know, it should not be the case that a government can be formed on such a tiny minority. And this is a way of changing the electoral system in order that then those issues like lack of housing or building on precious green spaces or whatever the issue is, that is the way to get your concerns on the agenda. So you kind of have to go through this process of changing the voting system, not for its own sake necessarily, but so that your issues, whatever they might be, can then get the attention that they deserve. And I think the knack will be to work out from the person you're talking to, you know, what their issues are and demonstrate that this is a way of being able to get momentum behind those ideas.
I'll just add, Oliver, you mentioned local election, and just, you know, the recent council election, by-election in Gypsy Hill that we had in Lambeth, where we're actively involved. It was noticeable that when we came to count the votes, and we got a huge swing from Labour to the Green Party, from 10% to 42% in a 6-week period. When it came to open that ballot box that came where there was an estate under threat from the Labour council, it wasn't just that people were voting Green out of that ballot box more than any other party. It was that there was double the number of votes coming out of that ballot box. There was double the turnout in any of the other ballot boxes. And again, when, you know, Martin Bell stood in Tatton and people really felt that there was a chance to make a difference. Now, that was a safe Tory seat, not even a marginal Tory seat, where Neil Hamilton had been on 55% of the vote. And suddenly you got Martin Bell standing as an independent, and the other parties standing aside to let him do that. And he overturned that majority, that safe majority, with more people coming out to vote that hadn't voted for, because suddenly they realised their vote would really count. And I think there's a lesson as well from the recent EU referendum. People in safe seats, particularly in the North and the Midlands, you know, for years their vote hadn't really counted. They felt they hadn't got control. They were often in safe seats, and suddenly they get presented with a possibility where their vote will really count. Either vote Remain or Leave, and it counts nationally. Every vote counted in that referendum, and boy, did they make their votes count. So when people feel they do have that control, you know, in that kind of setup that we're proposing in those marginal seats, I think people will really engage with it because they know their votes will really count.
Okay, so I am squinting at the screen to see that it says there's a member in West and South. No, so it's submitted from a member, sorry, : in West and South Dorset, we continue to find common cause with progressive parties on several issues, but the Lib Dems continue to betray our trust. What do we do?
It's quite hard without knowing the exact local circumstances about what's going on. You know, I think we have to be realistic. In some situations where, you know, trust will be continually broken, and it may not be able to work. But I would say I wouldn't give up. I would keep, you know, ploughing ahead. Obviously, going in with your eyes open in the particular situation. Alliances, I've got to be two-way for them to work. It isn't about one party standing aside for other parties. You know, there has to be give and take. A progressive alliance involves more than one person to be an alliance by definition. And so there needs to be that discussion. There needs to be that, you know, reality that we are bringing something, other parties are bringing something, and there needs to be a give and take for it to work. And that's what that trust must be built on. So if you are just doing things and you are just being let down by another party, whoever that other party is, that's not alliance. That's not going to work. Doesn't mean we should give up, but it does mean we should be sensible about it and realise when it, you know, the writing's on the wall and it isn't going to happen.
And it may be possible, again, through working with these third organisations, whether that be a Compass or a local progressives group or whatever it is, but it might be possible to kind of shame them to some extent by holding a meeting and demonstrating how much public pressure there is and how much public interest there is in people doing politics differently, and that might just be another strategy that could help.
Question from a member: should we not require a commitment from potential allies that they will work to advance the cause of electoral reform within their own parties before entering into an alliance? This could work well at a local level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely do need to do that. I mean, the real prize will be to try to get electoral reform written into the Labour Party's manifesto for the next election. I don't think any of us are particularly enthusiastic about the idea of another referendum to be held on electoral reform. So the idea would be to get it into the Labour Party manifesto. Clearly, it's already in the Lib Dems and the Nationalists and our own. So certainly, I think what you would want in that scenario would be a written commitment that they will do all they can, supposing it is a Labour Party candidate, to promote the issue of electoral reform themselves, that they will do everything they can to get it into the Labour Party manifesto between the time they've been selected and whenever the election is, and should they be elected, that they will actually work for that. And I think we will be looking at, I imagine we'll be looking at sort of local party agreement around memoranda of understanding. And at the same time, obviously, there'll be some discussions going on just in terms of a kind of a national framework for progressive alliances, so that although all of the actual spade work, if you like, is done at a local level, at a national level, you know, we will want to be speaking to as many people as we can in the leadership of the other parties to try to ensure that they are, you know, completely on board with this and will be supporting it, and will, you know, ensure that if there are a majority of MPs elected the next time around that support electoral reform, that there are guarantees that will then trigger a process to lead to a future election under PR.
Just to clarify, the idea is that if you've got 3, 4, 5 parties that are forming or supporting a minority government, and they've all voted, or have all had the mandate in their manifesto, it's been voted on for electoral reform, there's no reason why that should not be then brought in, and there will be the inbuilt majority to do that through Parliament, but there will have been that vote from the country in a general election in support of those manifestos which contain electoral reform, so that mandate is there, therefore not requiring the referendum.
You or me?
You're asking me this one.
And where is it?
World Basic Income.
Oh, well
I rather
done.
like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. World Basic Income.
Good name.
Ambitious. In Labour safe seats, e.g. Manchester, where Labour are our main opposition, how can the local party frame their election campaigns, given that elsewhere we're collaborating with Labour?
I've been absolutely clear that this would happen in a minority of parliamentary seats, a one-off for a general election. So, you know, say 50 seats in 550 or 600, depending on where the boundary changes have gone through. You know, it would be a normal state of affairs. We're in the Green Party because we believe we are different to Labour, certainly different to the Lib Dems. We've got a lot that's different to say we're standing on different values. And I know in Lambeth, where we've got Labour MPs, where I live, we'll be contesting those elections very, very hard. And it's very, very clear from our local campaigning that we have a very different position to those Labour parties. It was interesting to go back to the Gypsy Hill by-election. There are a lot of Momentum members that have joined the local Labour Party there, but they didn't come out and campaign for Labour in the recent Gypsy Hill by-election. They withheld their campaigning because they recognised that the Green candidate was good, was probably more in tune with their values than their Labour candidate. So yeah, it is very much about getting that local message out and being very clear in what we stand for. And differences with Labour. Labour will go into the next election supporting renewal of Trident. We won't. They are in favour of airport expansion. We clearly aren't. Road building. We clearly aren't. There are many, many dividing lines. I think Greens have a very important message about transitioning the economy that we have to get across. And Labour are not standing for that. They won't go into the next election on that. And of course, your name, World Basic Income, we will stand unequivocally on that going into the next general election. It remains to be seen whether Labour will buy into that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just simply say that although on the surface it may feel as if there is some contradiction between, in some places, being in some kind of cooperation with Labour and in others fighting them, in actual fact, I think the stronger that we are fighting those places we are fighting, then the more seriously we will be taken as interlocutors when it comes to a potential alliance, because it's only because we've got the potential to take votes away that we are actually serious players in that debate, really. So in those places, be that Manchester, where it's a safe seat, so an alliance isn't necessarily an appropriate strategy, then absolutely be going out there, war guns blazing, with a really, really strong message about why Labour is failing and why it is the Greens that are the ones who are standing on the issues that you care about.
one thing we certainly agreed on, we want to do more in terms when it comes to parliamentary by-elections and council by-elections, and we're trying to work with GPEX to up our game in that, and to make sure we are really focusing our resources in the right places and sending off that clear signal about when we do contest elections, we contest them very, very strongly. It's going up very quickly. We need to move on before we lose those questions off the screen. How do we convince other parties to join a progressive alliance if they have different priorities, e.g. autonomy for SNP, Plaid Cymru, MK?
Kerno. Cornwall.
Yes, of
I can't
course.
remember what the M is, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So, I mean, I would come back to the bottom line being that the issue upon which we want to seek common ground is changing the electoral system. And there may be some constituencies where over and above that, there's also a common campaign, for example, to keep a hospital open, or it might be rolled into some of the anti-Brexit campaigning as it was, for example, in Richmond. But essentially, the bottom line is on the electoral reform. And I think, you know, it can get quite complicated if a lot of other issues are kind of built into that as well. So probably in areas where there might be other areas where you've got different priorities, then focusing on where you've got a common priority about this one-off agreement to change the electoral system will be the best way forward. Yeah?
Go for it.
Go for it. So, okay, so this is
Andy Parkin.
Indeed, Andy Parkin. How much should votes for 16 years old form part of electoral reform, and is there resistance from some Lib Dems to this?
I think I'm a huge fan of votes at 16. I know you are too. I think what we have to be very, very clear and very, very focused in what the agreement is and the red line is, and what we've had in discussions, and we've talked to a lot of people for a long time around this, is that the more you add in to the kind of ask for agreement, the harder it gets to get that agreement. So you start to add in other constitutional issues, such as votes at 16. Sorry, we've got a message that's just come up on our screen that we might need to get rid of. Should you do that? There you go. Yeah. The more you add in things like, you know, even though they're really, really important, we all have issues that we're actually passionate about. I'm passionate about votes at 16, but the more you add in and the more you try to get agreement, the harder it is to get that alliance together, the harder it is to get people working together. So you know, electoral reform is the kind of game changer, the red line, the thing around which we would coalesce. And to add in votes at 16, I think would be difficult, even though it's a really important issue. Do you want to add anything on that?
No, that's
okay. You state that alliances should be ultimately up to local parties. So how do you respond to accusations that party leadership and GPEX sought to effectively bully Kingston Green Party into standing down? Do you think it's acceptable for influence decisions of local parties when there's no mandate? Sorry, so it goes over 3 questions. There is no mandate for progressive alliances from the national membership.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for being able to say very clearly that we absolutely challenge the claims in that report, and there is a process that is now underway from GPRC, which is doing an inquiry into that report, because it's not just Jonathan and I who would say that there are several things in that report that aren't true, but so are quite a lot of other people who are named in the report. So I don't want to comment on it further because obviously it is controversial, but hopefully to give you some reassurance would be to say that absolutely we are confident that the National Party in no way brought any undue influence to bear on the decision making that was made in Richmond and Twickenham, and indeed the Kingston Party. I think one of the complications, and I think one of the learning points that will come out of that report, will be about when you've got a constituency, a parliamentary constituency that covers more than one local party. I think there were lessons for us nationally to learn about making sure that equal weight and equal time is spent, you know, discussing with all parts of the local parties involved, and as I said, there were 2 local parties involved in this one. But having said that, absolutely, it would be inappropriate, and it didn't happen. And we are confident that the GPRC report will demonstrate that.
So, okay, I think that's it. I think we've run out of time. Has it flown already? It has. We have a message saying, hi everyone, we're wrapping up shortly. Thank you for all the questions and tuning in. Sorry that we didn't have time to answer all of them. If you have any feedback, do let us know. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I've really, really enjoyed it. Caroline, you about to
Yeah,
say something?
no, I was only going to say seriously, it would be interesting to know how it's felt for you, whether you feel we spent too long answering questions or whether we should have got through them faster, or, yeah, it's the first time we've done it. Thank you for bearing with us while we did. But quite seriously, if there are lessons to learn from how this has gone, we'd love to hear it, because we'd love to do something like this again in future, but we want to make sure that it works for people out there.
Yeah, and give us ideas about what we can talk about. If we do it about progressive alliances every time, it's going to get a bit boring. But if we, other issues that you'd like us to talk about and chat about, and other ways that we can engage with the membership would be fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
There.
There.
I can't see.
Stop the broadcast.
I generally can't read that.
It's not going to work.